And we are live, rocking and bopping to the music. It is the 16th, and we are here. Our topic today is embracing vulnerability, and I guess that's session 34, and which is really just a number. And so we're here together to share and talk about being vulnerable and how it applies to what you're doing. So we will jump into that after we do some introductions. Cass, jump in there.
Hi, I'm Cass J. Henry, and I just noticed, and I have to ask before I start introducing myself. It says open conversations with international coaches in our little title here, and I'm wondering if that was a play on terms with vulnerability, that we're all being really open today. um, I'm from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and I offer my services both in person and virtually. As an abundance coach, it's my job to assist my clients in altering their perspective from one of lack to one of abundance. Together, we'll discover the power of tools like affirmations, habit creation, mindset work, goal setting, experimentation, and journaling, just to name a few. And the overarching goal is to achieve a more harmonious balance in life. So if you find yourself feeling stuck and focusing on everything that's going wrong in your world right now, reach out. Let's do a free 30-minute discovery call, and I'd love to see if we're a good fit. I would absolutely like the opportunity to show you all the abundance that's already there in your life. And you can find me on cassjhenry.com.
Excellent. Shelly Ann, your turn.
Yeah, hi. So that was an accident, but I laughed about it, so I said I'd leave it in the open conversations. Oh, nice to notice it. And certainly I think it really does kind of fit, even though it was accidental initially. I am Shelley Edwards Barron from Trinidad and Tobago, and I am a gratitude guide and habit coach. And I guess this is an example of an opportunity to feel grateful for certain things, even when, as I think Bob Ross says, happy accidents.
Hmm.
Yeah, so what I do, I help my clients really embrace gratitude as a strategy. So it's not just about being thankful and about being saying thank you when somebody does something nice for you. Is about really living according to the principle of gratitude, which I group into the gratitude strategy, as I call it, which is saying it right, saying it loud, and saying it always. Because what happens to most people when they hit 40 is that they start to introspect and look at their lives and think about, where they are and what they've accomplished. And for most of us, we see gaps, and when we see those gaps, what we do is to add and add. We feel like we have to do more in order to be more and to get more before time runs out on us. And that always, and I'm saying always because I haven't really met anybody who hasn't entered into the realm of overwhelm as a result of that kind of thing. And so when we get to that overwhelm, what do we do? And for me, gratitude has made a huge difference, and it has made a difference in the lives of my clients as well. And so we discuss saying it right by looking at self talk. We discuss saying it loud by making the gratitude tangible and practical. And we discuss saying it always by making the gratitude a habit. And that keystone foundation habit leads to the building of other habits that get us to where we want to be while we're still gratefully enjoying the life that we have rather than feeling the overwhelm. So, for those who are feeling overwhelmed and you feel like you've tried everything and nothing is working, maybe try the gratitude strategy. So reach out and give me a call. You can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and let's have a chat about gratitude. I can talk about gratitude all the time, and even with vulnerability, I'm going to bring gratitude in because I feel really like it is the foundation for everything in life. Once we do it with a grateful heart, life is going to be what a word that I learned recently, and I love it so much, blisscipline, where we have the discipline and the bliss. That's what life is going to be like once you work with gratitude.
Awesome. Absolutely. Blisscipline. I love that. You you share that with us regularly, and it
Yeah.
always it lifts me. It brings a smile, and it makes me feel good. So just the word itself does that. Imagine what a little bit of coaching with Shelly Ann would do. Hi, guys. My name is Stephen B. Henry, as you can see there just below my picture or my video. My friends call me Steve, and I'd be glad to have you do that too. I'm known by many online as the coach's coach, as a large number of my clients are coaches themselves. I'm a multi niche coaching practitioner, and as an experienced online presence consultant, business success guide, and personal development mentor, I bring this holistic trifecta together for my clients in a single toolbox. My many years of experience across the spectrum of personal and business life and my sincere commitment to ongoing learning inform my approach and my work life ethic. By understanding that success is a journey, not a destination, one's goals become more attainable and exceedingly more enjoyable. That brings in the gratitude as well. Um, and as I often say, the time to hire your guide is before you get lost in the woods. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be glad to meet you and provide some assistance where possible. And so that's who we are. And we're a panel that get together every week at this time. Hopefully, you're watching live, or perhaps you'll come back for the replay. And today we're going to be talking about vulnerability, and it's definitely an important aspect in personal development, in self development, and understanding it and working with it is critical to our survival, our personal survival. We'll discuss this as we go along today, but I think it's important to start from that point. This may be one of the most important topics that we've looked at in our whole series, um, and we've said this kind of thing almost every time we come in here, that this leads on or builds upon the previous session. And as I look back over all of the sessions we've done, um, this could well have been our first session. It is that important, and yet probably it will not have worked as well if we had done it first. So it needs the foundation that we've laid out. So with that, I'm going to open it to discussion, open conversation, and we'll see where it gets to. Who wants to jump in?
I can jump in. One of the things that I did to prepare for today was I watched Brene Brown's TED Talk about being vulnerable. And what she says is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. And she says that you cannot have connection without vulnerability. And it's so true. Vulnerability is fundamental to our very existence, being able to put ourselves out there and have others see the true self that we are, and then not knowing if they're going to accept us or not. That's where that vulnerability piece comes in, the unknown. And she says that you have to try, no, sorry, you have to live by not controlling and not predicting. You just have to be vulnerable and be almost excruciatingly vulnerable in order for connection to happen.
And that's where it gets really, really scary. And I think for me it came through lots of different experiences and feeling like you're open and you're raw and anything can happen. It really is about releasing that semblance of control that we think we have over everything. And really and truly, when we just open ourselves like that, then we allow the experiences that help us grow and help us develop because we are now open to all of that. But it's not easy, it's not simple, and most of us have been hurt through being vulnerable. And so my take on the concept of embracing vulnerability is recognizing that while being vulnerable is generally a state that we want to be in, there is some caution and there is some, um, I guess, there's a caveat, there's an outline that we need to be aware of when we are approaching vulnerability. And I take it from two perspectives. So, on the one hand, being a coach and a guide and a mentor, there's an expectation that when clients come, we want them to be open and they do have to be vulnerable if they're going to make the strides that they want to make. But then, how do we create that safe space for them to feel it's okay to be vulnerable and to be okay? And then on the other side, being a coach and a mentor is one of the differences I see between that and being a professional psychologist, for example, is that there is a little bit more room for a coach and a mentor to open up to clients in terms of shared experiences and those types of things. But then there's a limit as well. How much vulnerability do you, as a coach and a mentor, give with that client situation? So, those are the two areas that I'm really thinking about when I think about embracing vulnerability. And I'd really love to get thoughts on that in terms of what, where do you see all of this happening and coming into play in that coach client relationship, as well as personally as a human?
We tend to have these models, these modalities of delivery of our services that we've learned, sometimes from teachings and sometimes from experience, and they may or may not be right all the time. And by being a little bit vulnerable, by opening ourselves up and allowing that response in, we can better measure what it is that we're doing. And that's important to making sure that we get out there and we're doing the right thing. Um, and even saying that opens the door to a problem that, what is the right thing, and is my right your right? This, when we're connecting, doing it. So by being open and being a little vulnerable ourselves as coaches, we can perhaps better discover what it is that the client needs, and what perspective they're coming from, so that we can address that. But you used the term fear, and man, I know that that is such a big thing for people. They have many, many fears. And a mentor of mine many years ago shared something with me. It's been a meme forever. You'll see it around from time to time. But he treated fear as an acronym: FEAR, false evidence appearing real. And not only is that a meme, but it's actually a true and tested circumstance. It has been explored to some significant extent that most of what we fear never happens anyway. And if you think about it, you spend time worrying about things and fearing what's going to happen, and then it doesn't go that way at all. Things change and circumstances are different, and so we waste a lot of time worrying about and fearing things that aren't even going to happen. And it's over 90% in studies. I forget the number, but you can certainly look it up, and just understand that it's a large percentage, a very significant percentage, of things we fear never come to be. And of the remainder, the things that come to be, most of them turn out okay. So we spend a huge effort fearing a very tiny amount of reality. And if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and open to the circumstances around us, we can better judge the things that are going to be worryable, things that we need to tackle and deal with. And it is such a key function of our lives to embrace vulnerability and to understand how it gives us actually a new power, a new approach. And I think that for me, um, I'm actually a very shy person, and I still experience shyness in many circumstances. But I was the kind of kid that stood behind my mom, looking out from behind her skirt when someone was at the door, and it took me years to understand that. And then it took me a couple more years of practice once I found the solution. And now the solution has become the ability to embrace that vulnerability, that feeling, that fear of what might happen. That's what shyness is. It's a fear. It's false evidence appearing real. And you overcome that by putting yourself out there, by making the choice to put yourself
Yeah,
out
by doing
there.
something that isn't nothing. I'm in love with that phrase
Yeah, yeah,
completely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I'm going to draw on that Brene Brown. She's a researcher, and she's worked with thousands of stories from people all across the world. And she says really there are two types of people in her research. There's the people who have a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging, and there are those who don't. And she says that the only difference between those two people is that those who have a strong sense of worthiness believe that they're worthy of it.
Mhm.
So they fully embrace vulnerability. They think that vulnerability makes them more beautiful. And it isn't about whether vulnerability is beautiful or excruciating, it's just necessary. We have to be vulnerable in order to create connection. We have to be vulnerable in order to meet other people where they're at. We have to be willing to be our silly and weird and wonderful selves in order to find our crew of people that make our life worth living. Right? If you don't ever show who you really are, you're not going to find the people who appreciate who you really are. And then a
Mhm.
lot of people end up wearing masks. And I wanted to go back and just to answer a little bit about your question there, Shelly Ann. I think that we talked a lot about this when we talked about boundaries
Yeah,
and being able to read a situation. A lot of people, I call them neurospicy people, and they connect by sharing stories. So one person will share a story about an event that's happening in their life, and the response from the other person will be a similar story, and it's basically saying, oh, I heard what you said, and so this is how I heard it. Did I get it right? I think that's what that's usually. It's not saying I heard what you said and now let's bring the um, bring the focus.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's bring the focus onto me. It's saying I'm still focused on you, but I want to know that I heard what you were saying. And so people often get frustrated with the sharing of stories like that, like no, this is my time to talk, I'm focusing on me, why are you bringing it about you? And neurospicy people aren't saying this is about me, they're saying I'm coming together, I'm showing my vulnerability at the same time, and I'm saying, and we're finding a connection over those two shared stories. So boundaries in that place might look something like acknowledging that you're sharing space for the other person, and that their pain uh, needs that space. And you could ask them things like, if you've lost a loved one, would you like to share some memories about that loved one? Or if they're angry, you could ask, do you need room to express that anger? And so learning how to have that dance of a conversation, I think that that's what coaches do, because they dance all the time with their clients. They're always doing that back and forth. They're always sharing. you know, the pieces that they understand. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
and yes, and recognizing what the client needs in that moment, because there are times when the client really needs to hear another person's experience and how they overcame, or
Yeah.
just to hear the experience to know that, hey, I'm not alone feeling this, and sometimes they just need that space. I heard you and I listened. Do you want to share more? So there's that, as you say, it's a dance, and there's that interaction. And because of the insight and the training as a coach, you would recognize when it's appropriate to, say one thing or the other. And another thing came up to me as you mentioned that, and it's something that Steve you say all the time, a coach needs a coach, because there are times that as a coach you need advice, you need that own space held for you as an individual, as a professional, as a coach. And so being vulnerable as a coach also means to me being willing to reach out to other coaches and get that kind of support. So yes, there is that client coach relationship that we manage the vulnerability there, but in our own space, how do we manage that vulnerability and reaching out? Because sometimes I've had experiences where coaches would say things and tell you almost more like a consultant telling you what to do, as opposed to listening and helping you figure it out on your own, and with guidance and support, and that added breadth of experience. And it's almost like what do you really need? What does this client really need? Do they need to be heard, or do they need to be guided to a destination at this point in time? So there's a lot happening with that vulnerability in the coach client situation, as well as with the coach to be able to give the client what is necessary. And I find the whole thing really fascinating, because so far in the discussion we've been having, there is a very clear indication that vulnerability looks different for different people. It's not a matter of this is what vulnerability means, and when you see this, this is how to recognize it. You really do have to be open to learn other people to see what vulnerability looks like for them.
We are all so different. We tend to try to put things into little boxes or buckets. And what's the song Little Boxes, referring to the houses on the hillside in California. um, and we really do that a lot as people. That's a normal human reaction to things. We like to tidy up and have things in their place. And what we've been talking about here, and especially in conversation and listening and sharing and finding the same space, um, there's a structure called feel, felt, found, and it's used in sales closings. But it's also a very good um, example or structure that we can use in our lives in conversation. And it basically goes like this: you would never use it as directly this way. It's just too cut and pasted kind of thing. But to understand it, we can look at it this way: somebody shares with you, and you say, "I know how you feel. I felt the same way. What I found was," and so it guides your conversation in that empathy that can be there and that sharing that can be there. You don't even have to use those words, feel, felt, found. That's just a mnemonic to keep it in your mind so that it's understandable to you. But you'll if you look at yourself as you're sharing things, you'll notice that you tend to do that a lot. I know how you feel. I felt the same way. What I found was, and you're sharing, and it comes up in our conversation all the time. It was brilliant when I heard it first time. And again, I've had the luxury of having some amazing coaches over the years, amazing mentors. And it's why I encourage coaches to go that route. I'm not trying to sell my services to you. I mean, I'll gladly do that. You can sign up. I'll give you the link. No, but it's sure, we're in the commercial business, and we do that part of it, but understanding why we're in the coaching business, if we're serious about it, is that it's not just a money making profession. It is a service. It is a commitment. It is a personal desire. And when we see the success that we've had in our lives, we have this desire to share that. And in order to share that, we have to put ourselves out there. And that's being vulnerable. And a lot of beginning coaches have some great things to share. And they have some great attitudes and great personal commitments. And what holds them back, there's all those different things. The overwhelm with what's out there in terms of the dealings and the techniques. There's the imposter syndrome that raises its head, but it all comes down to vulnerability. You need to understand and embrace your own vulnerability so that you can get past those things that are holding you back. Be vulnerable about it. Be willing to take a punch or two when things aren't right, and continue learning. But having a coach or a guide or a mentor there to fall back on, to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, you know here's this problem, somebody you can go to. Yeah, a buddy, a friend, they're great, and they can be good to stroke you, to feel better about yourself, but they may not be able to provide the support that you really need, or to provide even the methodology for you to get out of where you are. You can feel good about where you are and be stuck there. So sometimes getting unstuck and moving cast, you use the term unstuck fairly often, and that's one of my key focus points is for people that are stuck, what do they do to get moving? And getting moving is often about letting go of those shields that we've put up around ourselves, opening up and being a little bit vulnerable so that we can take that step. That's a tough thing, taking that next step.
Mhm.
Whether it's a first step or a 3,287th step, it doesn't matter. The next step can be difficult.
Mhm.
We'll get there from there.
I think that one of the things that comes to mind as you're talking are the words "I am enough," and
Mm,
that is the place that um, you step off from into vulnerability. The knowing that when you wake up in the morning and you're going to do your gratitude or your morning pages or whatever habits and whatever you're doing in your life, you wake up in the morning and you're not coming from that place of lack, right? That's what I talk about as abundance. I am enough just the way I am. I may need to learn things, I may need to unlearn things. That's part of life. That's the living that I'm going to do. But before I do the living, before I go out and be vulnerable, I come from a place of I am enough. And when I go and be vulnerable with somebody else and I'm not comparing myself to them, I'm just being me and letting them have space to be themselves because they too are enough. And when we come together in that place of abundance, we're coming together and we're saying, I'm bringing my enough, you're bringing your enough, and what's that going to look like together, right? So the vulnerability piece is just it is the next step, and it's where you start from. That I think is what you're working with your coaches on, getting to that place where you can actually say those words to yourself. I am enough.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you mentioned about your vulnerability meeting another person's vulnerability, because quite often, and it was true for me in the beginning, when we are making that step and being vulnerable, we tend to look inward only. And so we see ourselves and our own vulnerability and our fear, not recognizing that, hey, there are others out there and they are also going through that process of feeling that vulnerability and so on. And it's like, while I'm saying that, I thought of, when people are learning public speaking, and there's this thing that is often told, imagine your audience in this particular way. Imagine, what they're doing or what they're wearing or whatever
Not wearing.
context, yeah, or not wearing, as the case might be. But that act and that point of imagination, what it's really trying to get at, in my understanding, is that the audience, they're human too, and they're also vulnerable. And the fact that we say, think of your audience without any clothes, for example, not wearing clothes in our modern society is considered vulnerability if it's not your choice, right? And so that whole concept of imagining your audience in a particular way is, in some regard, recognizing the vulnerability in the audience. And when we recognize vulnerability in others, it makes us feel a little safer, because then we realize, hey, I'm not the only one who's exposed. Everyone else is exposed. Even when we try to hide and we wear the masks that we choose say something about us for those who are insightful and who could read certain, into certain things. So we really are vulnerable sometimes, whether we care to acknowledge it or not. And I feel like being really open about it frees us from the burden of trying to hide something that we really aren't so good at hiding when you think about it.
The one of the things that I looked up said that they called it the troublesome business of being human and alive. That's what we're going through, right? We all have morning breath. We all have bad hair days before we do something about them. We all have weird bodies because everybody is weird. We all because they all fart and burp and give off smells, and right, we all have these oddities of being human. It's all the human condition, and we're all living in the same I want to say the same fake world, right? Where Photoshop exists and filters when you're taking that selfie, they all exist because we're trying to put on the mask of something that is an
Yeah.
expectation of us that is not us. But truly being yourself, truly having that vulnerability to say this is me, that's when deep connection happens, and that's
Mhm.
when you feel most alive, when you are connecting with people. I like the word crew, the person that you can sort of, I don't know, I didn't have a shower this morning and I'm wearing my pajamas, but you can come over anyways because I know you're not going to judge me. I know you accept me as I am. And that's what we all hope for the most when we're connecting with people, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, when we are open to recognize that this is who we are, and we allow others the space to be who they are, then we know what we're dealing with and we know how to adjust, and we know we have, it's like we get more control with vulnerability than we get trying to control. It really is. Is such, what was the phrase, the business, oh no, the troublesome business of being human. That's the what you said. It is, I love that. It absolutely is that.
Yeah, there's three components to interaction, to communication, that we tend to uh, perhaps overlook a little. And one of them is self-compassion. We need to understand ourselves. We need to give ourselves some breaks, not be so hard on ourselves. And so that's the inward looking, the self-compassion. And then, as we talked in a previous session, there's setting boundaries. That's the outward direction. That's looking at the other person, and we put those boundaries in place to give us what appears to be control. And that's good. That gets us started in the right place, and it lets the other person know where we are, where we're coming from. And from that, right, the internal and the external, from that comes the two-way part called trust. We talked about that in a previous session too. But we need all three of those to build that relationship, that understanding, that communication that brings us together as humans. And we have a need for that communication. We can't overlook it. Those who think that they can kind of hide away, they're doing themselves a disservice. And when they start to realize, when they let go a little bit and be vulnerable and put themselves out there, even just putting their toe in the water to check, they suddenly find out that, oh, that's not a scary thing after all. We can get involved in that. And as long as they're prepared to look at those three aspects of it, the self, that compassion for yourself, giving yourself a break, looking outward but setting some boundaries, and you can be prepared to loosen those boundaries as time goes, but initially they might be quite tight. That's okay. And over the time of doing that comes that trust. It's so powerful, so powerful.
The essence of trust is an acceptance of vulnerability based on positive expectations.
Yeah.
So, the idea that you've allowed yourself to be vulnerable, to show your true self, and you've had positive results in the past. So, people have liked you, people have accepted you, and you've repeated this over and over again with favorable results. So, that means you now believe it's likely to happen if you're vulnerable. And that's how you end up getting to a place where you can continue to be vulnerable. I'm one of those people who, when I'm in a group setting, I'm always willing to be first. I often, I pause because there are other people that might prefer or need, or something about being the first person. But if nobody's willing to do it, I'm always willing to jump out and be that first person, because it's a place that I have felt vulnerable in the past, but I've repeated it over and over and over again to positive results. And I've never had a problem being the first person to break the silence in a group setting.
Yeah.
So we've talked in the past about experimentation, right? That's
Yeah,
something
yeah,
that you
that's
can do with
exactly what I was
vulnerability.
thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It
exactly
is.
that idea of
Go ahead.
experimentation, and the fact that vulnerability is not a one-time thing. And okay, so if I'm vulnerable today, that's good. I'm good for the year. I'll be vulnerable again next year sometime around this time. Yeah, it doesn't quite work like that. It's an ongoing kind of thing that we do get to choose every day how we show up
Yeah.
and how we are willing to be vulnerable in a moment in a given day. But it's not something that, I've checked vulnerability off my list. What's next? Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't quite go like that.
It is a state of being. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
part. It's
yeah.
part of who we are that works. And in my own experience, where I made that breakthrough in terms of shyness was to embrace it, not to overcome it, but to embrace it and realize that it gave me a certain strength rather than it being a weakness. And that happened when I was studying theater, and I had the absolutely great fortune to listen to Sir Michael Caine, um, one of the greatest actors of all time, and he came from a difficult background, and kind of got almost forced into stage work, and ultimately into movies, and he had to overcome his insecurities, and he talked about that and shared about what he did and what he does and how he became these different roles in parts that he's played. I mean, the guy is throughout his whole life, he's very distinct. He's one of those actors that has a certain look about him, and a certain style, and certainly a certain accent in his speech. So it's pretty hard to miss him as who he is. And yet he played this huge range of characters in many, many, films that we've seen him in, but also in many, many stage appearances. And he he embodies the role. And you know, you can't help but say, well, that's Michael Caine if you know who he is, uh, and yet that is whoever the character is. He delivers that, and he shared with us as a class. He shared with us how that came about and what he had to do and embrace to do it. And one of the things that was there was vulnerability. I'm not sure if he I mean, it's years ago. I'm not sure if he used that word or not, but looking back on what he shared with us, it was that opening up of yourself, to the others, to the audience, with this comfort level, knowing that they were going to see not you, not your inner self, not that the things you're trying to protect, but they're going to see the character that you're creating. And to create, to quote another person in the theater area, somebody you might know, he said, "All the world's a stage." And that's a very important aspect of what all of us do in that living, in that life that gets in the way. We are walking upon a stage, and we are presenting ourselves as a character. Everybody does that. And when you get to the point that the character is you, that it's comfortable for you to present yourself, you sort of made it. You've got there. You're at that level of a top actor that can step into almost any role, any circumstance, and deliver themselves as somebody else. And I'm not saying fake it. I hate that expression, fake it till you make it. But you do have to put yourself out there and determine, model who you're going to be. And
That's why
I
I say faith it till you make it, right?
face it
Believe
till you, yeah,
believe
believe
who
in
you
yourself.
are until you believe who you are.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, believe
And
in who you are until you believe who you are, and then
I
you
love it.
then you will have become who you are. And that's the
Yeah.
problem. We don't know who we are. Sometimes we don't like who we are, and then we realize, wait a minute, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. Now, that's a quote also from somebody else. It's not my original thing, but if you think about it, examine that. I am not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am. I am whom I think you think I am. We realize that we are not necessarily recognizing our true self. We have to
Yeah.
explore, we have to open up, we have to be vulnerable in order to get to our true self.
I wanted to also touch on another thing that Brene Brown brings up, which is numbing, and
Mm.
that people often are uh, trying to get away from the need to be vulnerable, and they do that
Hmm.
through various means. As she says, we are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort that there's ever been, and that we numb in ways that we're looking to avoid the vulnerability, but that we can't selectively numb. So when you avoid the shame and the fear and the vulnerableness and the scariness, you're also avoiding the joy and the love and the connection and the happiness. So numbing takes it away from everything. And so we become miserable and we start looking for purpose and meaning in our life. And
Hmm.
the thing is that the only way to um, to be seen is to be yourself, to be vulnerable. And you do that by you practice gratitude, you practice joy, you live with your whole heart, and you know that there's no guarantee that what the outcome is going to be, right? You're just living who you are, and that without vulnerability you can't do that.
Mhm. And I see it a lot in the industry of education. Um, and to me, it's very practical in that arena because in order to learn and to grow, we need to be open and vulnerable to the fact that we don't know. And so if we come into a situation thinking that I know and I have this, and then what is there to gain? What is there to add? What is there to explore if I already know and I already have? Um, so we do have to be vulnerable all the way through our education. Yet as children, we feel okay with that because this is all we know. But then throughout, as we grow older, it's like we are taught that vulnerability is not okay, and there's something that slowly evaporates to the point where when we get into adulthood, we get to the point where we feel like if we always have to know, we must always have the answers in order for things to be okay, in order for us to be okay. When the opposite is actually the truth, where we have to recognize we don't have all the answers and we don't know. And that is how we learn and we grow and we really become who we can be by recognizing that we don't know and therefore we need to learn. And I really find that quite interesting within the education system, which is something that I know it's a conversation about how formalized and standardized education, what it is and what it does. And there are lots of theories about it and so on. But for me, the essence is around this topic of vulnerability. Are we allowed to be vulnerable? Are we allowed to embrace vulnerability? And at some point, we have to take that responsibility as we grow older and as we recognize what life is and what it's about. We do have to take that responsibility in and of ourselves to choose to be vulnerable, even when we feel like we're not being allowed to, because without, I mean, based on what we've been discussing, without vulnerability, there is no connection with others. Without vulnerability, there is a limit, if any, joy and happiness and fulfillment. So without vulnerability, there is, there's a huge limitation on life. And so we have to make that choice, that active choice on a daily basis. When we get up, deep breath, how am I going to show up today? How vulnerable am I willing to be today? And also recognize, as Steve mentioned, with the self compassion, maybe today is not the day. I'll do it tomorrow, perhaps. Sometimes that happens too.
Yeah, I really liked your examination of childhood and growing up and losing vulnerability. I think that's an important consideration here in our discussion. I often refer to childhood curiosity. I say to people, don't lose your childhood curiosity.
Mhm.
And I guess I could even modify that by saying, don't lose your childhood vulnerability. And I think you're right. Children are vulnerable by nature. They're open to things. They just absorb so much. And you watch a toddler growing, and you see every breath they take, they're absorbing something new, and they're awe inspired by what's around them, and it's wonderful to watch. And they do lose that as they go on. They eventually they become cynical adults, and
Can I interrupt quickly with a
yeah,
little tidbit here. That's so important that scientists have now trained some AI on toddlers. They didn't take an adult person and put all these cameras and figure out how they learn a new language or learn a new skill or something. They took cameras and sensors and they put it on a toddler to see how a toddler is a sponge and how a toddler learns,
Yeah,
because that's really where that curiosity and vulnerability and the true deep learning happens.
yeah, it is so fundamental and foundational,
Yeah.
and it gets overlooked. And I had not heard about that study, and that impresses me about AI. It's good. I'm an AI early adopter and supporter, and but this happens, and then what happens is that society, not just the parents training the child, but society at large, teachers, law enforcement, all the different areas, medical personnel, press down that vulnerability, suggesting that that you can't allow the child to be out in the real world in the danger. And that's because our society does have dangers. It has, bad actors that are going to cause harm, and that's unfortunate, but it exists. And so we close off the vulnerability. And by the time a young adult is, seeking work and looking for a profession and exploring their social interactions, they're completely closed off. And it's perhaps why so many marriages go wrong, because it is the mask that people see when they're dating and when they're building those relationships. They don't let themselves be vulnerable, and so they don't find the right person, the right match. So many, many difficult things. And then over time, as they're together, they become vulnerable. They, release those bonds, and then suddenly they see the real people. And boy, that's not the person I thought I married. Well, yeah, it was. You just didn't know the person. So this sort of thing happens, and it may not be that they're bad people. It may just be that they're the wrong people. So it's
Yeah,
not.
the incongruencies.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that can happen, and great, wonderful people that were able to craft a persona is not the right person for you. And you need to examine that. And I'm not sure that there's an answer societal wide, but what I will say is that we don't have to be vulnerable all the time. We can
Yeah.
control our vulnerability, and we can set those boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah.
Setting boundaries is not, you're not doing away with vulnerability. We can choose to open those boundaries to be vulnerable and test the waters, and then close them right back again if we're not comfortable with where we are. That's okay. We're not,
There's
I'm not saying anyway that you have to live vulnerability. And I'm sure some people have felt a little uncomfortable with this conversation, and you don't need to be uncomfortable. You can control things, but be prepared to allow vulnerability into your life at least a little.
there's a term called a vulnerability hangover, and the idea that you've gone out and you've been vulnerable, and it's made you feel like you didn't want to be. You said too much, you did too much, you come away with a vulnerability hangover. And that's okay to do sometimes, right? That's okay to feel that way sometimes, but you don't need to feel that way all the time. You don't need to be vulnerable in every single place. Like you just said, Steve, you can choose the time, the place, the people. And at a job interview, that might not be the place that you want to be extremely vulnerable. But when you're out
Mhm.
with your friends, and maybe you're having a dinner somewhere, and they ask you a question, and you've known them for a long time, that might be the time to be vulnerable, maybe about the job interview, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So that vulnerability hangover is something that you can feel, and it can be okay. And you don't have to not be vulnerable again if you felt that way, I guess is what I'm saying.
And I think in terms of choosing what to be vulnerable about, so being vulnerable doesn't mean that everything is laid bare in every single moment. That in and of itself is going to be really exhausting. But like for example, with the job interview, being vulnerable about your job history. sharing certain moments. One of the questions that I don't know, I haven't had an interview in a while, but one of the questions that is quite often asked, what are some things that you learned about, past experiences? Why did you leave that job? What happened at the end of, this particular, what caused you to transition? And, why this degree and not that one? And there's a gap in your resume. What's that gap about? So you get those kinds of questions, and those are situations where a certain level of vulnerability can actually land you the job.
Right.
So it's really about kind of recognizing how much vulnerability is appropriate and what kind of vulnerability, what area should I be vulnerable in? And those things can only be learned through experiences, whether your own or someone else's. Because, like as you said earlier, it's okay for you to go first, and you actually welcome that because you've had experiences where you've been supported, and you know that going first is going to be okay. And so only through those kinds of experiences can we come to that kind of insight. So we do have to have those experiences. And when we don't have the experiences ourselves, this is where a coach, mentors, reading books, observing other people's experiences and lots of other opportunities can come in. And so I see like vulnerability is like everything else in life. When we approach it with a certain amount of intention, and we think about, okay, what am I doing this for? What am I gaining from this? How is this supporting me and supporting others? How is this helping me show up? How is this helping me enjoy my life? And we ask questions, and then we come back to curiosity. We are
Curiosity.
curious about this concept of vulnerability. When that happens and we do that for our own life, then we can see that, we can learn how to, ride the waves, navigate the seas kind of thing, with the ups and downs and the ins and outs of vulnerability.
We bring these topics out each week. We tend to focus on one topic, and we nicely, I think, as you just did, Shelley Ann, bring a perspective to it, put it in its place of the overall um, focus of things that we do. And it brings to mind the idea of creating a stew. Life is a stew, and you want to bring all of the parts together early and bring it to a boil, spice it appropriately, and then turn it down and let it simmer. And when we think of life as a stew like that, and we want to get the best flavor out of it, it's more than one thing. You don't make
Yeah.
stew with a potato. You don't make stew with a piece of meat. You have to bring various elements together, and I think that's what we do in these sessions. And hopefully, those of you who are watching this perhaps for the first time, or maybe only you've seen one or two of our episodes, go back and look at our other episodes, and dip into them and see the various concepts that we've talked about, because I think you will see that what we are creating here, we are coaches, we are chefs, we are creating a stew called life, and we're examining the individual components to be sure that you get the best of the best, but you still need that mix going together. um, I think we're coming up on time here now. Cass, have you got we've already got a topic for
We've
next
already
week.
got a topic for next week. I just wanted to leave the last thought here as you are enough.
Hmm.
That's where I wanted to leave that.
Yeah.
You are enough. I am enough. And our topic for next week is journaling.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So, well,
there's so much talk about journaling today, and various aspects of it. I'm looking forward to this topic because I think it's something. As I've written the book called uh, the Morning Pages, that's about journaling, and I'll share a copy of that next week as well. Show up; it'll be great.
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, take care, everybody. Enjoy the
Bye.
week. Bye.